Namaste, group hug. Please come and join me on the sofa. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Donna Shorto, who is the Managing Director at PraxisIFM. Donna, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Karen. How are you?
Very good. Good morning to you. So we are delighted to have you on the show this morning, and many of the viewers may not have met you before, many of them might have met you before, but it would be really good if you just tell them who is Donna and what do you do at Praxis?
Of course, yeah. So thanks very much for the introduction. So as Karen said, I am the Managing Director of the PraxisIFM Private Client Office in London. So my background is I studied law actually at university and thought I was going to be a lawyer, and then my dad was bitterly disappointed that I decided not to. So I'm originally from Guernsey, so I was originally working for Credit Suisse, and I just sort of fell into the trust and corporate world. It was, it's a very big industry in the island. And from there, sort of worked my way up in the business, joined PraxisIFM in 2015. And then we decided that, it was time to open a London office in September 2017. So we already had a presence here. We had a fund administration office, but we wanted a private client offering too. That sort of stemmed from, property tax changes taking place, which meant that the offshore jurisdictions weren't necessarily as attractive, but also just because London's such a big centre of excellence that it made sense for us as a global firm to have a London office. So I came out from Guernsey, from a very small island to the big city, to run the office over here.
Perfect. And how many staff has the organisation got? I mean, I know there was a merger, was it 2 or 3 years ago? So maybe just run us through that quickly so people understand the company.
Of course. Well, so PraxisIFM as a whole, I mean, it's we now have 475 staff worldwide, and we're in 17 different jurisdictions. So that's really, the company's really grown ever since we listed on the International Stock Exchange, which enabled us to sort of raise capital in order to go out and acquire some businesses in different locations to spread our reach and to make sure that we had continuity for clients. In the London office itself, in our fund administration office, we have 14 staff, and then in our private client office, we now have 18. So the London business started organically. There was 2 of us that built that up from scratch. And then we acquired a business in London called Jeffcoat Donaldson. So we took on an extra 10 members of staff from that acquisition. And then again, the business has grown since then. So we've recruited, and now there's 18 of us.
And what are the key jurisdictions? I know you said 17, but which ones would be the headline ones?
So I suppose, we're headquartered in the Channel Islands. So obviously Guernsey, Jersey are, they've traditionally been very popular in terms of trust and corporate structures. And then London obviously being a really key one now. I would say our Amsterdam office is a really key location for us as well, just because it's another onshore location. And there is a lot of sort of international expansion services that go through there with businesses looking to migrate from Holland or vice versa. So we do a lot of work there. And then we also have a New York office now as well. And that's, I know, I definitely want to go and visit that.
I'm coming with you.
And that's obviously really key as well. Difficult at the moment with, the situation in America. But I think, there's so much business, going on out there. We're sort of looking at it from a trust perspective, because, up until now, we've really been dealing with sort of corporate services and HR and payroll and that sort of thing. But it's huge. And we see in London, a massive trend in terms of inward investment from the US. So we're doing a lot of work with our US colleagues at the moment.
It's quite funny, isn't it? Because the whole change in the laws and stuff sort of 6 or 7 years ago meant everyone got out of the US client market, didn't they? And then all of a sudden in the last 2 years, people have seen how much money there is gravitating here, I think because of tech. And now everyone's getting back into it, aren't they? Like as quickly as they can. But I think it's great. It's definitely a New York-London connection for sure.
There is. And I think, in terms of property as well as tech, I mean, there's a lot of property being brought from US wealth, whether that's in the, in the healthcare healthcare sectors, or your kind of traditional resi or commercial. That really is ongoing, and we'll come on to COVID in a bit, but that obviously has stalled things slightly, but I think there's a lot of transactions still going on in the background.
So how have you managed through COVID? I mean, how has the organisation kept itself working? And give us an update on that. It's been, I think Suzanne Kingston called it the Corona coaster, like this. So everyone has one day like this, one day like this, one day like this, and then they reset. So it's like just a sort of an ongoing weirdness, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I mean, we joke about it, but actually from a mental health point of view, I think it's been a real struggle for a lot of people. So we're really lucky, obviously, in the line of business that we're in, that we already had the technology behind us. So working from home was relatively easy. The systems were already set up for that. So we have been working from home, I think, since the 10th of March, which was a long time ago now. And actually, there's been a couple of colleagues who, for perhaps childcare reasons or because they were living on their own and have really struggled with the working from home environment, we have allowed a couple of employees to go back to where they're originally from. So we have a lady who is from Greece, and then another from Romania. And so they're now back with their families, and they're finding that they're able to be much more productive because childcare is taken care of, or their general well-being has improved because they've gone back. And that's been really important to be flexible during the time.
And that's been a trend, hasn't it, that we've seen in London, that if people have, or their family are in another country, there has been a real sense that they need to migrate back and just be with their people, hasn't there? I mean, that's kind of hit the whole of London, actually. And in a way, it's becoming quite difficult for hospitality to get back to normal, because a lot of staff who might have been Spanish or Italian have actually left the building, haven't they? Gone back, and once they've gone for a few months, it's obviously much easier in an office environment with work from home. But I think in hospitality, I think you can kind of just set up your life back in that home country, can't you? So it will cause a bit of a reset, I think, in London with an international community, with quite a lot of them departing, and who knows with quarantine at the moment.
Well, that's it. I was just about to say, obviously that's going to cause some issues as well. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of this kind of threat of a second wave of coronavirus, which we're obviously all hoping doesn't come back to the UK, but we've seen it in other countries. And with the quarantine now being imposed with Spain, which was very upsetting, because I was supposed to be going to Madrid at the end of August.
Well, we've got April, who's our editorial person, who's actually in Spain at the moment. So she's got a new baby, and so she's going to have to work out what she's going to do. So I don't know whether it might change in the next couple of weeks, because things kind of happen, don't they? And then they can switch back quite quickly. So I think it's just a wait and see, unfortunately, for that, isn't it? Yeah. So what about the business environment? I mean, not talking about clients and client advice just yet, but what's your thoughts on the effect of the trust industry with the various laws that have changed, or COVID, and what's been happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly from my perspective and my experience during COVID, we deal a lot with trading companies in the UK. So we've obviously seen, that has been that's had a real impact, particularly, small to medium-sized enterprises, which, have very much relied on that movement of trade and that continuing, and that's obviously slowed massively. So they've really struggled during this time, and I think have taken advantage of the government schemes that have come out in terms of job retention and the loans and the furlough schemes, etc. I think on the private client side, we've still seen a lot of activity, and I think while some clients have been very cautious and have sort of thought, okay, we'll wait and see, we don't really want to enter into new property transactions because very difficult to get valuations at this stage, with us not really knowing where the property market's going to go, so they've put a stall on things. But equally, I think other clients have seen it as a real opportunity to get a good deal, in terms of perhaps some commercial space that is going cheap because people aren't thinking about going back into an office environment, or in the healthcare sector, I think there's been quite a lot of consolidation, and that's brought opportunities with it. So yeah, we've definitely seen that from a COVID point of view. I think in terms of the trust and corporate industry in general, Obviously, substance requirements have come in, and that's been a big shift. We've got a BVI office, and there's been a lot of work done, I think, out there to make sure that clients are obviously complying with those substance laws.
So tell the viewers about the substance law.
Yeah, so it's basically just, obviously, I think traditionally a lot of clients have set up offshore companies to hold assets that haven't necessarily been in the jurisdiction where the company's been set up. And they may have appointed management or directors, again, that weren't necessarily in that jurisdiction where that company's been incorporated. So the new substance legislation basically dictates that you need to be able to evidence that there is some substance or management and control going in the jurisdiction where you've incorporated that company. And there are various requirements about how you sort of satisfy that, whether it's holding board meetings, whether it's having people physically present in that jurisdiction, whether it's actually renting office space. It varies jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but that's sort of the basics of it. And so that's obviously caused a lot of shift in terms of how structures are managed and how you evidence that there's substance and whether that's the right jurisdiction for people now. If there are these rules now, is it too much hassle to sort of set up somewhere where perhaps there weren't really any ties? There are other benefits, because I think also with beneficial ownership registers, in the Channel Islands and BVI, that's all still private. It's not publicly available, but we don't know whether it's going to go that way. The UK's had a publicly available beneficial ownership register for some time. So I think, confidentiality, rationale for why people have set up structures in certain jurisdictions, those may well fall away in future years. And so you might see a shift of where people are thinking about setting up their structures. And I think just in case of the UK resident domiciled environment, I think, or UK res non-domiciled, I think, the offshore arenas certainly still have their place, and there is definitely reasons why you would still want to use those jurisdictions. But I think, there has previously been a campaign, by HMRC and just by the media in general about the offshore jurisdictions and, labelling them as sort of tax havens, which actually isn't true at all. But I think it's created a stigma. And I think, a lot of clients now think, well, I'm just going to set up UK structures or onshore structures because it's easier. And I know that, I'm not going to get inquiries through from HMRC, which may not be legitimate, but it's still a hassle, isn't it? It's an administration hassle and worry.
So 2 points there. I haven't heard much about healthcare. You said there's been some consolidation. And then what are the reasons people would go to BVI then if it's become much more difficult and you have to have sort of on-site presence, which I think BVI is very difficult to get to. It can be with flights and stuff. So that would rather suggest it has become more tricky. So why would you go to the BVI still?
I think, it is still used for confidentiality reasons at the moment, definitely. So because it doesn't have a publicly available register, and obviously it is an attractive jurisdiction in terms of its, corporate tax rates, etc. So that all of those benefits are still there. But I think mainly it's its link to America, I think, because of its, where it is, the location of it. And also it has, really strong ties with Asia. So kind of our Hong Kong office and our BVI, they work very much together in terms of setting up structures. You can actually, there is a piece in terms of perhaps trying to create more substance in Asia, while still using BVI, but actually changing your management and control from necessarily being in the BVI to that Asian environment. And I think there's definitely work going on in the background about whether that will work. But I think BVI won't work for everybody. I think, you have to think very carefully when you're setting up structures now about really where is the right location, jurisdictionally, and from a geography point of view, taking sort of tax considerations into account, but also, just making sure you really understand the laws of those jurisdictions and what you can and can't do, and making sure that's right for the types of structures you want and your objectives really moving forward.
And so a healthcare consolidation, just give me a quick download on that.
So we've got a few clients in the healthcare sector, and I think a lot of the smaller healthcare providers are perhaps selling at the current time. I think, we've got a client who has a very small domiciliary care business, and it's been profitable. He's been doing well, but it's sort of, it's plateaued for a few years now. And, he just thought, with COVID going on, obviously they're still very busy, but actually from his point of view, trying to have to manage that when he wasn't living in the UK, that was a very difficult thing to do. So his option was, find a buyer. He got bought out, and then that business has obviously created, a larger profit for itself and a larger business, and brought on extra care workers. So I think some of the smaller healthcare providers have perhaps struggled during this period because, they might have employees that have been overworked and then are off sick themselves, and then just trying to really continue to provide the same level of service and provide the same level of resources has been difficult. So consolidating with perhaps a larger healthcare provider has seemed like a very good solution.
I've heard a bit of stress in the dentist industry with the different rules and regulations and masks.
I can't go to the dentist yet.
No, well, quite. And apparently a lot of it is to do with that they haven't got the right PPE and all sorts of stuff that they've got to have very specific masks.
Yeah.
Expensive. So I can see how that could be trouble. So what are your clients ringing you about? I mean, we've seen obviously various themes emerging, but I mean, what are your specific clients ringing you about and saying, what we've just told us healthcare, but anything else?
Yeah. I mean, we've got a few clients who are in the sort of bridge financing space, and that's really interesting because although obviously that your sort of mainstream providers are still providing lending, they're being a lot more cautious, I think, in the current environment because, like I mentioned before, property valuations not necessarily being, you're not able to rely on them as much, and you can't forecast. So alternative lending has definitely sort of been a trend, and we've had some inquiries about that, and we've got clients who do it. So sort of teaming up, two of our clients who might be able to sort of help each other out. That's sort of been something that we've been looking at. And I think, again, from the trading business point of view, it is, we've had so many inquiries about, what can they do in terms of their employees and the furlough scheme and how long that's going to last for, and what loans are they sort of applicable for. So that's been, we've been kept incredibly busy with all of that. I mean, we have a payroll specific department, so the inquiry have just been fielding in, but we've just really tried to support them during this time. And I think those trading businesses, it very much is a sort of wait and see. The ones with cash reserves have are doing okay. Trade is starting to mobilize again, so that's really encouraging. But it's been a really tough time for those small businesses, particularly online retailers and the food industries have survived quite well because there's obviously been a growing trend to get your food online or buy your clothes from ASOS or wherever that might be. And so I think they've managed to generate revenues from those types of sales. But I think for physical food retailers, which perhaps don't have an online presence, that's been a real struggle.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting though in London, I'm sure you've seen, but we're in Baker Street here, even big organisations like the Natural Kitchen, which has a huge space in Baker Street, hasn't reopened yet, and they've not done any online delivery at all. So it's interesting to see what they're doing, if it is just this wait for September, which people are expecting.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand perhaps not reopening because obviously that's a staff cost that you have to bring back. So I guess you have to make sure you've got the right footfall in order to make that viable. But yeah, I think people have been very creative in this time in terms of what they can offer from sort of online deliveries. And I've seen, I've ordered picnic boxes, when I'm doing picnics in the park at the weekends, and cocktail making from home and doing virtual Zooms. I mean, that's all been really popular and a really nice idea. And I think businesses have had to get creative during this time in order to still generate revenue.
Yeah, interesting. And so any themes? The themes that we've heard about so far have been mediation becoming much stronger with the lawyers, because people literally have had to find a resolution to things because court wasn't available.
Yes.
Wills and succession has reared its head.
Mm-hmm.
So any themes that you've spotted?
I think on the property side, we've seen more interest in kind of high value property in remote locations. So I guess because people are thinking they don't really want to buy in the city, particularly at the moment, or they wanted somewhere to perhaps isolate, but for whatever reason, we've seen that kind of, that high value property in sort of the rural areas become much more popular. And we've done quite a lot of deals in relation to that. I think distressed asset investments, I mean, that's been very popular, using fund structures to do that. There's been some real opportunities there. I think, in terms of kind of tech startups, I think, the venture capital backed tech companies have fared very well during this time, whereas sort of the customer related startups have had the most negative impact. So there's definitely been more of a trend to kind of looking at those tech companies and moving away from perhaps other sectors which we've seen sort of a trend in before. And then
so when you say the customer ones, there were any specific examples?
I mean, anything where you sort of have like a physical customer, that perhaps where you have companies that aren't necessarily built around technology. So I'm trying to think of an example now, but maybe just think of maybe like a homeware shop where they perhaps don't have an online website. They perhaps aren't really kind of dealing in technology to process all of their orders, that kind of thing. I think those have been where those have started relatively soon before COVID started. Those types of companies are probably struggling, whereas I think companies with a strong technology behind them and with a lot of backing to create capital in order to see them through these hard times, those ones have fared much better. And then I think just again, consolidation in general, I think in terms of family wealth, I think we've just seen people really taking stock at this time about where their wealth is, what they really want to be doing with that wealth, what their objectives are in terms of succession planning or preserving wealth, and just really thinking about where they want to place those funds and how best they do that. And again, I mean, it all feeds back into technology. I think the next generation, they want instant reporting, and that you can only really get that with technology. So I think banks and service providers that can provide that type of technology and provide sort of on the spot reporting are faring well, and then those that perhaps don't have that option perhaps are either losing business or not gaining the business.
Right, so interesting. And what about private equity? I saw that on your blog that was an area you knew something about.
Yeah, I mean, we do. We have, private equity sort of spans all of our kind of 3 pillars of service, which is sort of our pensions, our fund, and our private client. I mean, we don't deal in, I think in the London office, we don't deal as much with private equity, although, we do have clients who are dealing in that. I think at the current time, I would say we've seen less of that, just from our side. People aren't necessarily sort of looking at that space until I think things become a little bit clearer in terms of the environment.
So maybe a pause in that market. So give us a quick lowdown on Praxis, all the different services you do, and then give us a crystal ball on COVID. What do you see coming up in the next year or two?
Okay. So yes, Praxis, as I said before, global services provider. I think we have 3 main pillars of service, which is our fund administration, our pension administration, and then our private client and corporate services. So from London, we deal with 2 different types of clients. So we have our corporate clients, which are generally our UK trading entities, and we provide administration services, company secretarial, but we also do all of the support services as well. So, bookkeeping, accounting, tax compliance, VAT, payroll, anything you can think of, name it, is very much like a business concierge service is how we like to promote it. And then on the private client side, it's sort of what you would anticipate. So, dealing with trust and corporate structures for high net worth individuals. And that includes, providing directorships and trusteeships, dealing with all of the administration, coordinating all the assets, making sure we're reviewing investment performance, Yeah, and that's really what we do. I mean, what we try and do at Praxis is, you know, come up with innovative solutions for structuring wealth. So, you know, we talk to our clients, we understand what their objectives are, you know, what the family dynamics are, and try and come up with structures that work for them, not necessarily, you know, because they're tax efficient, but because, you know, it works for the family themselves, how they can sort of communicate and delegate authority, and really, yeah, who they want to provide for. You know, is it the next generation? Is it the generation after that? And just making sure that, yeah, that works for really, yeah, what they're planning on doing for the future.
So give us your
my crystal ball.
Crystal ball, yeah.
It's difficult, isn't it, to foresee what's going to happen, because we really just don't know when COVID is going to end. My fear is that obviously we've had a lot of these kind of government schemes which have obviously been needed in this time, because businesses have really suffered, and you know, they wouldn't have got through it without the government backing. But I think I saw a statistic today saying that they've put in 124.3 billion into these schemes and incentives, and that has to have an impact on future years. You know, that money has come from somewhere. So I think in terms of a negative future crystal ball, you know, we're definitely going to see that play out somewhere, whether that's personal tax rates or business tax rates or wherever that might be. And obviously there's been, you know, a lot of deferred tax payments as well, and those are all going to have to be collected, and that's going to have a massive impact as well. And unemployment has obviously risen during this time. I think it's around about 9%, I think. So those are all, you know, factors that are going to have to be taken into consideration, and that's not just going to bounce back immediately. But I think on the plus side, you know, the UK property market has really started picking up again. You know, we are seeing a lot of transactions going on, which is really positive. I think people do compare, you know, the COVID pandemic to, you know, the financial crisis of 2008. And, you know, there are obviously some comparisons in terms of where the economy's got to, but I think we were on a much better starting point. So you would hope that, you know, as soon as sort of life starts to resemble some form of normality, that, you know, business can bounce back relatively quickly. I mean, a really great story is Guernsey, actually, because they've dealt with the COVID pandemic so wonderfully. You know, there's no social distancing on the island, and yes, I know they've restricted travel in and out, but, you know, business is sort of, it is able to resume. And if we can get through the COVID pandemic, I think, you know, we should be able to bounce back relatively quickly.
That all sounds really positive. So I just want to say to the
positive note.
Sorry, say that again.
Try to end on a positive note.
Well done. No, always end on a positive note. Very good. So I just want to say to the viewers, if you enjoyed watching myself and Donna having a chat, please press the thumbs up, and you can subscribe below. And we do these sessions each Tuesday and Friday at 10:30, quick updates on the market internationally. So Donna, I want to say thank you so much. Been nice to have a chat with you, and we look forward to seeing you soon once COVID finishes. And I wish you a good day.
Thanks, Karen. Lovely to see you.